What is up, y'all? Anything happening? Anything popping out there in Inside Carolina basketball land? I'm Joey Powell. This is the Coast to Coast Podcast. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt, and we're brought to you by Congruity. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I'm going to let you guys in behind the scenes a little bit here. Things are a bit chaotic because, full disclosure, your boy, as the host here, was planning on doing a requiem on the season. Fully expected this to be the end of the year, the end of the line. We could be discussing how we got here, what was the situation, how things were looking, et cetera, et cetera. And, so here we sit. North Carolina is in the big dance. The first thing I want to start with, Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan are here with me, as is Greg Barnes making a special appearance tonight. The helicopter landed in time for him to be here, so we're grateful for that. I'm going to go around each of you and give me like 1 minute of how you felt in the last 72 hours. Sean, you were in first today, so I'm going to let you take it first. Go.
I'd say pretty irritable after the Duke game, but I think also based on the premium message boards, I thought there had been a good thread that was laying all the different scenarios, and I felt maybe quietly confident that UNC would be able to get in. So I was extremely surprised and happy when they did, and excited to have another game to talk about. I think it gives at least me a chance to see the team against a non-ACC foe, and it will eliminate the question of what if they had gotten in. If they lose, they lose. But it's nice for me to be able to watch them have another game. So was irritable after the Duke game, but was had made peace with either way, but was silently confident going into the tournament selection show.
Greg, why don't you go ahead? What were your thoughts when it happened?
Never a doubt, right? I mean, that's the so just looking at all the metrics. As you guys know, I'm probably too much of a metric fanatic. And as the course of the weekend played out, two things I was looking at. One, were there some of these teams that North Carolina was in contention with on the bubble? Were they making any noise? And the biggest question was, are there any bid thieves? And everything after that Duke game fell in North Carolina's favor. And I really thought this morning, that if North Carolina could avoid the VCU and Memphis losses, that they had a shot. Now, as it turned out, that ended up kind of being the storyline. But the metrics were so good for this team beyond the actual wins. This team struggled to win important games. I mean, 1-12 versus Q1, that is the worst of any at-large team to make the tournament since they started using the quad system about 7 years ago. Not good. Carolina was 2-10 versus top 50 teams in the net. That's not good. However, they did a pretty good job being competitive against really good teams, and they took care of business against bad teams. And what we've seen in the past from the committee is, they want to make sure that you have teams that can potentially advance, but not so much of a concern on the other end. And I think what we saw this weekend is that while there are teams that were struggling against average opponents, North Carolina got credit for that finally. And I think using the WOB stat really helped. And look, there was 5 bid thieves last year. So if that happened this year, Carolina would not even be in the first 4 out. So Hubert Davis needed some luck. He needed some fortune, and he got that today.
Mine went, it's kind of funny. 2 people one was Jalen Withers. Obviously, that's where I first went. And the other was a professor at Carolina named Donald Shaw. He passed away a few years ago. I'm going to explain those 2 things. For Withers, obviously, like you don't want your last moment in college basketball after, a pretty solid career in the ACC to be maybe the biggest mistake of your career. So I'm sure when he saw the announcement, like he probably was crying, probably had some deep breaths, like he has another shot now. That's not how his story ends. So at just a human level, you feel really good for somebody like that who has worked so hard over the course of the season and really, turned his, I don't say his career, but turned his season around about a month ago and really was one of the driving forces behind UNC, going on this streak over the last 10 games. So that's one. And then 2, like I said, Donald Shaw, he was a professor at UNC, professor emeritus in the journalism school, and he was, along with Max McCombs, pioneering in the field of the idea that the media doesn't tell you what to think, but the agenda set. They tell you what to think about. And as we're watching and seeing who got in and who didn't, it was kind of like, well, these guys, they don't know what's going to happen, but they are informing our conversations about what's going to happen. And so what happens when that happens, when the people who are informing the populace don't really understand how decisions are made, that's where a lot of conflict comes in. And I think a lot of anger comes in from folks who probably aren't on an IC podcast right now. So that's what I thought about. It's just like, man, they're behind because they're using previous year's metrics and tools to decide who was going to be in the field this year when things have changed. So Donald Shaw in agenda setting and Jalen Withers were where my mind went when Carolina got in.
All right. Well, thank you guys for kind of holding the line while I had to deal with some technical issues. I hope that the popping and static and stuff on my mic is gone. Thank you guys for letting me know in the chat. Appreciate you guys covering for me. And yeah, I would also like to make the same comment about Jalen Withers. I think that a lot of folks on Saturday or on Friday night kind of felt like he was the reason North Carolina was not going to make the tournament. And Sherrell, if you touched on it, forgive me. There was a myriad of things over the season and in that game that could have cost North Carolina a potential win. So I don't think it was just Withers, but yeah, I absolutely feel good for him that now he doesn't have that kind of hanging over his head in a sense that it kept him from postseason play. I would like to jump right back in and give props to one Greg Barnes, who, Greg and I have been texting back and forth since, I guess, Thursday, and Greg has kind of said, no, I think they get in. I think they get in. And to Greg's point, he made the comment that regardless of what has been promoted as the major drivers and the major criteria, the big thing is that Greg said if there are no bid stealers, North Carolina should be okay. And there weren't any bid stealers. I think, if you watched today, you saw Memphis and you saw VCU and you saw, it kind of shook all in North Carolina's favor. So that's absolutely insane. But I want to make sure I give Greg props to that because he stuck by that and said exactly how it would play out. So shout out to you, Greg. I'm going to follow up with this question. What do you think got North Carolina in? Because, again, we kept seeing there's – what was it? Was it 13 or 14 points that the committee was pulling from? So I want to ask you, what do you think if there was one specific thing that got North Carolina off of the bubble, what do you think that it was, Greg?
I think it was the fact that everything that North Carolina had in the metrics was better than everybody else outside of the Q1. And it's really this interesting dynamic where the committee has hyped up the metrics for so long, but yet we've seen in recent years, 2023 is a good example, where if teams did not have not even lacking Q1 wins, if you didn't have a good record, Oklahoma State was the first team out in 2023, and they were 6-12 in Q1. And the selection committee chair said that, yeah, they won 6, but they played 18. So they didn't have a good efficiency in those games. And so I think when you look at North Carolina's metrics, they were great in KenPom. They were good in WAB. Really up and down the board, they were better than most of their competitors along the bubble. And, with the bid Steeler situation, with there being none, this was a weak bubble. And even though North Carolina lost in that one category, they won in most of the others. And I think that's really what got them ahead.
Same question, Sean. Is there one metric for you that you felt like kind of nudged North Carolina in their favor? Because I think Greg's onto something. All we kept hearing about was wins against Q1, and Billy Bob Basketball 01339 on social media kept saying, well, UNC sucks at Q1 wins. Yeah, we all know that, but clearly that's just one data point. Did you see something, Sean, that you felt like probably helped North Carolina maybe more so than other things were? And you hear guys say, oh, the eye test, who was playing better, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I'd ask you the same thing.
I wasn't going into each of the metrics too much, but one, I'm the next time I'm glad I don't have to hear Q1, or at least it has to be the defining number, just because, once again, just watching basketball, a Q1 win can be winning at Northwestern, which is not a difficult thing to do. And UNC, they only had one win, but you can look that they did have, with 4 minutes left, they were leading or within one possession of a lot of the 1 or 2 seeds. So I think it does show their ability, if they can put it together, to play and compete. I think on this show we probably use Ken Pom as one of our most talked about and utilized references, and I think just from that you've seen them go from number 47 after they lost to Clemson, and it's been a slow tick up to number 33. And I think that showed, once again, from an ACC, they weren't beating Q1 teams or really top 100 teams, but they're finally starting to play together. You can look at the last month, top 20 team. And then even when you start diving into all the Indianas and the others, there's always going to be a case that you can make. But when you really look at the other ones that either just did get in or didn't get in, a lot of those big wins were coming within a 20-game slate, most of them coming at home. But there were other big losses. There weren't any other games where they're playing top 10 teams and competing. So I think when you dove into a lot of the other teams, yeah, they might have had more Q1 wins, but looking at Ken Pom or some of the other metrics that are taking in efficiencies and how teams are playing, I think to me that was the one thing that gave me a little bit of confidence. Granted, you could look last year, and I think Pittsburgh was the number 33 team, and they didn't get in. But we can go into this more, but I think it does go to the lack, the ACC, that they need to do a little more than have Joe Lunardi come speak to them next year on how to fix everything, because it's so hard when, for UNC, they only had 2 Q1 home games all year. So once again, not a lot of opportunities, but I do think looking at the metrics and seeing how they continue to increase over the time, and then once again played Duke to I know he didn't have Cooper Flagg, but played them to 2 free throws. Louisville lost by 10. So once again, you're competing versus, say, a Boise State that lost by 11, or an Indiana that just lost pretty badly on a neutral court. So to me, it meant that the committee was actually watching the basketball games and looking at a wide variety of metrics instead of relying on Joe Lunardi and the Jerry Palms of the world.
Joey Clickets, a.k.a. Joey Split Screen, a.k.a. Harry Palms. I'm not going to go off on a tangent right now because I don't want to kill the vibes in the room, but let's just say none of it makes sense to me. Like, just the way those prognosticators and the people, like Sherrell said, that get propped up to tell folks the agenda or to announce the agenda, I can't get my head around that. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I'm not giving them enough credit for just being in it for entertainment value. But
Joey, I know you like to make a wager every now and then. So would you rather be on the side that everybody is wagering on, or would you rather be on the side that the smaller percentage is wagering on?
Yeah.
Not a perfect analogy, but I think there's some truth to this.
So the next question I'm going to ask for Sherrell, and Sherrell, I recognize, dude, I sometimes throw you these curveballs, so I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to tell you it's coming. Here comes the slider. Does North Carolina deserve this? I mean, I think we had all prepared for the show to be a very downer show, and I'm not saying they don't deserve it. I'm just asking, in light of the way the whole season played out. In your mind, do you feel like that North Carolina deserves to have a shot in the NCAA tournament?
Yeah, I'm going to answer your question by saying I don't think deserve really has anything to do with it.
What deserve got to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's just they have a set criteria that they say they use, and if you use the criteria that they said they did, then North Carolina should be in. Now, we can have a conversation about whether or not that criteria is the best criteria, whether other things should be taken into account, I was about to go into tweak, alter, or pivot, whether or not it needs to be changed into and add more things. Are there other metrics that should be put in? I don't know. But if you look at, there's a great ESPN story, a great story from IC that went into kind of what it takes and what is done when the selection committee is meeting. And it's like, well, if you take them by their word and they say, these are the things we're looking at, then they really had to say that UNC was in. Now, that raises questions, I think, moving forward about scheduling and winning games and all this stuff. But I think the committee was smart by putting Texas and Xavier and UNC in, because when they say, well, why would you put a team who's 6 games under 500 in conference play, they can say, well, we did it with Texas, so it's been done. Or they say, well, why would you put a team with one Q1 win in? You can say, well, you did with Xavier and Carolina. So like they're kind of I don't think it's like that serious where they're setting this up for the future. But now they have a way to say, well, just because there's never been a team who was 1-11 in Q1 doesn't mean we won't do it this time if they meet the other criteria that we set forth, heading into the selection process. So, I mean, again, I don't mean to cheat your answer, but I deserve doesn't really matter because
you gave me a wire. You gave me a wire reference. You had me at what does deserve have to do with it. So, Greg, you want to jump in on the tail end of that?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt North Carolina backdoored their way into this, which counts, right? I mean, as we talked about earlier, a year ago they wouldn't even be in the first 4 out. But I had an old AAU coach who told us 2 things all the time. Number 1 is there's no such thing as good losses. And that's one of my pet peeves with how some of the Carolina fans kind of approached the past couple weeks, saying, hey, you know what? We played some really good teams and lost. That's not something to be proud of. You got to win those games. But the other thing he told us was never apologize for your successes. And North Carolina is in the NCAA tournament. That is important. So don't ever apologize for that. And I agree with Sherrell. It's really not a matter of do you deserve to get in. Did you do enough to be one of the final 68 teams? And they were just barely enough, but they are in. And, it's going to be something we're going to talk about for a long time. But the fact that North Carolina played well enough down the stretch, at the end of the day, they were the good enough on the bubble to be able to get in. And so, they're in. I don't know that really matters if they actually deserved it because they're playing Tuesday night? Is that when they play?
Tuesday. Well, here's the thing. I've seen Tuesday, and then I've also seen on some of the default brackets says Wednesday.
I don't know. When I saw San Diego State UNC, I just kind of blacked out and everything went away. I don't even know. I don't even know who they're playing. If they're a 12 seed or 11 seed. Like 11. I'm being completely honest.
They're
like, I have
11.
no idea.
They're playing in 11. Yeah.
Where are they? What region are they in?
They're in the South. We'll get to that in a second. Don't jump ahead on the show run sheet.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So I appreciate you guys humoring me, and I realize that deserve doesn't have much to do with it. I get that. I think there's a lot of been a lot of mixed reaction amongst the Inside Carolina subscriber base. Obviously, with the emotion that came out of the way the loss happened against Duke, just the way things have strung out the last 48 hours. So that's kind of why I threw that question there. Maybe it's a little bit of bit of red meat. Who knows? Yes.
Let me jump in. Speaking of red meat, let me jump in. We're going to talk about the NCAA tournament. We're going to talk about North Carolina and how they snuck their way in. No one is saying that this is the standard for North Carolina basketball.
Thank you.
Like, I understand that everyone is excited that UNC made it. I understand there's a group who are like, why are you excited? But you can be both. You can say, you know what, this is not great for UNC. But you can also say, you know what, good for those kids. They could have quit after Clemson. They found a way to keep moving. They found a way to win, was it 8 out of 10? They found a way to come back down 24. That's all the stuff you can say. Like, I see there are both sides to this argument. I think for this particular podcast, and I'm sorry to jump in, Joey, we're going to talk about the NCAA tournament because that's what's up next. So just don't confuse us talking about this and talking about matchups and talking about what North Carolina can do in the tournament with, they're fine that North Carolina is, in the first 4 and they're elated and they're so excited. That's not what we're saying. We're discussing what's next for UNC, and then there are other things to talk about after that.
Man, you're going to make me kiss you on the mouth. Like, that's one of the things that I've struggled with recently is I think there's folks are so kind of emotional about this season, and rightfully so. I think folks think that just because we haven't gotten on here and buried the performance that we are accepting this as a standard, that it could not be any further from the truth. Both things can be true. You can recognize that North Carolina really has some things they have to fix. They really need to address this inconsistency. But for tonight on this show, as we're discussing right now, we're going to talk about the tournament, like Sherrell said. So the next thing I want to throw at you guys, and again, I appreciate y'all bearing with me. Again, literally had to rewrite the show when I got a text at when I got a text at 6:20 p.m. or whatever it was. Let's talk about the quad one, elephant in the room. Greg touched on it. Obviously, that was the one thing that folks just banged on against North Carolina over the last 72 hours. Even going back into a couple of weeks ago when you really started kind of analyzing, could North Carolina make a run and get this, is the lack of wins against quad one. And you go back and look, and North Carolina had 13 chances in quad one games. And to your point, Greg, that all of the quad one games are not the same. North Carolina was playing teams that were going to be number one seeds in the tournament. North Carolina was playing teams that were in the top 10 of the AP when they played them, and only got, I think, 2 of them at home in Duke and Alabama. So, again, all quad one games are not the same. But what I'd like to ask y'all is, how do you think this changes, or does it change, how North Carolina schedules moving forwards? Because if quad one and your performance against quad one is going to continue to be the thing that everybody bangs on, clearly it's not the be-all, end-all that we thought it was. How do you think this changes how North Carolina schedules moving forward? Greg, I'm asking you first.
I need to be careful here. We're talking about the University of North Carolina basketball team.
Yes, sir.
The Carolina basketball. So if the conversation is that North Carolina needs to go light on scheduling because it's too difficult, give me a break. That is not the North Carolina standard. Never has been, never will be. I don't agree with that. Roy Williams loved playing difficult schedules. And you look at the schedule that North Carolina played this year, and granted it's because the ACC sucks, but it's the second easiest schedule overall that Carolina has played in the Ken Pom era, which dates back to 1997. I think they've played 13 teams ranked 100 or higher in Ken Pom. Roy Williams loved the opportunity. Dean Smith loved the opportunity to play against the best, because that's how you measure yourself. And that's how you claim that you're one of the best teams in the country. And it used to be that the ACC provided those opportunities. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case. Hopefully that returns. Maybe North Carolina just ends up leaving the conference in a few years and is playing with that same quality of team in the SEC or the Big Ten. But regardless, I don't think you change your approach in wanting to play the best because you think you are the best. I think North Carolina is the top program in the country. I understand that I'm biased. That's what I believe. And if Carolina decides to go soft on the schedule because they lose some games, I think that's caving. And I think that lowers the threshold, that lowers the standard. And I don't think that's what this program needs to be doing.
Fair enough. And I appreciate the needle that you had to thread with that. That's a very diplomatic answer and spoken like the true vet that you are. All right, Sherrell, you would like to offer a counterpoint to the representative from Holly Springs?
Yeah, I would say this isn't – North Carolina's not the best program in the country. Like, over the last 60 years, yeah. Over the last 5, 6, 7, however many years you want to say, it's not. And part of the problem, I think, with UNC is that they are slow to adapt. Whether that's positive or negative, they're slow to adapt. And if you're going to be in a situation, which North Carolina has been 75% of the time under Hubert Davis, that you're on the bubble, that you're waiting on Sunday at 6 p.m. to see if you get in the tournament, then you have to adjust for that if you're going to keep Hubert Davis as your head coach, which we think and know that North Carolina plans to do next season. So if you're going to do that, you have 4 years of evidence that says more than likely North Carolina is going to be on the bubble. Then you have to schedule to help keep them off the bubble. That is a lowering of the Carolina standard, absolutely, yes. But if you don't do that, you're going to allow the Carolina standard to be even lower because you're going to miss the tournament because you're not scheduling correctly, because you're going 1-12 in Q1 games, this year. You're going, what was it, the NIT year? It was something like 2-10, 2-11. If you can't win those games, which they've proven they can't do consistently over the last 4 years, don't schedule them because you're going to end up here again. And if they can't win those games and you continue to schedule them, then you have to figure out something else. And I think you have to, again, if the basketball program is going to stay like it is, you have to help it get across the finish line. You can't just say, let's do it like we've always done it, because Coach Smith isn't walking through that door. Coach Williams isn't walking through that door. And that's no disrespect to Hubert Davis. Those are 2 of the 5 best coaches of all time, but he's not that. So you have to help him. And that's kind of where I'm at. Now, if you have a year next year where it's better, and then you have a year, if you stack a couple years on top of each other, that's fine. Do that. But if not, then I think you're setting yourself up for failure by continuing to schedule as if you have Roy Williams or Dean Smith as the head coach.
So, having heard the point counterpoint, Sean's getting red faced, so I'm going to throw him the unenviable task of letting him try to either split the difference or sway it one way or another.
I don't think I need to split the difference. I think I agree with both points. To me, it's the ACC is not coming back, and unfortunately, with 20 games, you know what you're going to get in January and February. So to me, it's trying to schedule 1 or 2 games in that January, February. Once again, Duke did it with Illinois. That was really the only data point, non-conference data point that anybody had to go off of, and I think that does allow for teams improving. I think also, I love the home and home with Kansas, et cetera, but can they look at a few more Big Ten teams or some other teams that are going to be quality games that maybe not so much gimmies, but ones that can ideally, to Sherrell's point, help them feel a little more secure. That way, when you're playing in the SEC Challenge, they're going to be matched up against a top team when they're playing in these other tournaments. So over the years, as Sherrell mentioned, their record in the non-conference has been horrific. Ideally, that can change, but are there ways to, once again, schedule in February an opponent just so you have another data point outside of the conference play? And then I think it's just being a little smarter in terms of the teams that you are trying to play against in January or November and December.
Well done, fellas. I think it's again, I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. I think everything that you guys said is pretty spot on.
So Carolina has played 6 teams in the top 10 of the net, and their average margin of defeat was 11.2 points per game. And that includes the game on Friday when Duke was shorthanded without the National Player of the Year, and it's probably second best defender. I think that's kind of beneath the Carolina standard. And I'll just leave it at that.
Listen at you, man. You were taking us right up to an edge and making us think for ourselves. We're going to get to that at some point, by the way, to everybody who's listening. And shout out to the 1,337 of you that are in here live with us right now. If you're listening to us later on, we still are appreciative that you're here. Want to make sure you subscribe because we do this all the time, and it's not just our show. There's plenty of other content from inside Carolina that you want to make sure it comes directly to your device so that you get all this goodness automatically. But we are going to talk a little bit, after the season ends, whenever that is, about kind of what the standard means and how does the standard apply in today's basketball, because I do think that has changed, and I think as Greg has kind of led us to a couple times, I don't think tonight's the night to have that conversation, but stay tuned. We'll get there. I think tonight's more about talking about what happens next because there is still basketball to be played. And I have this will be the 3rd time now that I have to make peace with North Carolina, the end of North Carolina's season. Just sitting here thinking about, I had assumed after the Clemson game, all right, they're done. What can I do in middle of March to distract myself because we won't be doing podcasts? And then, had kind of brought myself to it before the Duke game. They were getting thrashed. And now I'm going to have to do it again whenever the season ends this time. But either way, I would much rather be talking with y'all about games happening this week than not happening this week. I think one of the most important things about this week in North Carolina actually getting into the NCAA tournament are the fact that there's still more time to go buy basketball gear from Johnny T-Shirt. This actually extends your ability to wear North Carolina basketball gear and it not be out of season. So go ahead tonight, tomorrow, whenever, go to johnnytshirt.com. Get you something to commemorate this absolutely insane season. Maybe punish yourself and buy something for somebody else, or maybe reward yourself and get yourself something nice because you've dealt with some ups and downs like we've never seen before. JohnnyTshirt.com. We're such fans of theirs. They are big time supporters of Inside Carolina, locally owned, alumni owned, just great folks. If you don't see them in person on East Franklin Street, make sure you check them out at JohnnyTshirt.com. Plus, and we wouldn't have discontinued this even if North Carolina didn't make the dance. You still get that extra 10% if you're a premium subscriber. You can find that code on the message boards. Use that for your gear. We will be right back. If you're listening to this, there's going to be some national ads that run right here after this. And furthermore, we got more to talk about. We got a tournament to talk about. Listening to the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. Appreciate y'all sticking around. I'm Joey Powell, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran. Greg Barnes is here with us tonight. He just finished up his round of 12 under at the TPC. I'm assuming you got to go back and finish up tomorrow, Greg, or did they finish that tournament today?
I ran out of balls on number 17, so I just packed it in and.
If you're going to dunk one, that's the place to do it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, so let's actually look forward. I want to ask you guys, Sean. I'm going to come to you first. How do you feel about this draw that North Carolina got? I mean, we're going to talk specifically about San Diego here in a second, but you went from having no idea that North Carolina was going to be playing this week, at least in the NCAA tournament. Now they're in the tournament. We know they're going to be playing Tuesday night against San Diego State. But just looking at the draw itself, Sean, how do you feel about it?
Well, one, I think you have to be happy no matter what, because you can't really complain about who you're getting to play in a playing game. But in terms of what they do have matched up with, I think there's no excuses. They're playing a Mountain West team that typically is extremely strong defensively and going to struggle a little bit offensively. We can go into more in depth into San Diego State, but then once again, just looking at the potential matchups, Ole Miss tough, but SEC team that's going to be athletic, and here's a chance that is not one of those Auburn or Florida. So here's a chance to play an SEC team that see how you can compete against with some better athletes and a well-coached team. And then even looking a little forward, Iowa State, very scary when we were potentially talking about them in Maui. Once again, strong defensively, very talented offensively, but one of their best players is out in Gilbert. So in terms of the first weekend, I mean, it's as ideal as possible for a playing game. But once again, as we said across all the ACC games, one game at a time, you never know what UNC you're going to get. But really, to me, San Diego State, they're favorites. And offensively, it's going to come down to, are they able to not go those 3+ possessions without scoring? But to me, once again, I don't think anybody should be complaining, especially with how it stacks out right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you can't really be choosy about the draw, and that's kind of where I was kind of going. Is do you think North Carolina, I guess, has a chance to kind of make some hay? Greg, same question.
I do. I think so many of these things have fallen into place for North Carolina. First, with being selected. We've already discussed that.
That's got to happen first. You're right.
That's right. But, I mean, getting to play on Tuesday night when the next game's Friday, I mean, you're getting a day break, right? I mean, that's huge. That's a massive advantage. And then I guess if you're only having to go up the road just a little bit for your next game, that's a big advantage. And then, I agree wholeheartedly with Sean with San Diego State. That's going to be a physical team. They got a couple big guys. Ducher's done a great job with that squad over the years. They've got a lot of experience, even though they do have a lot of transfer pieces in. But what really stands out about San Diego State and Ole Miss as a potential first round game is that neither of those teams are good rebounding teams. And I actually have used Ole Miss throughout the course of the season as kind of an example of what North Carolina could be, even though, of course, the big guy down low is a little bit different than anything that Carolina has. But Ole Miss plays small. And, of course, Chris Beard gets after it. Both of these teams are very good defensively. Neither of them are elite offensively, although, of course, Ole Miss is a lot better than San Diego State. So I think when you factor those things in, it shapes up pretty well for North Carolina. You are talking about three, if you advance, three really good defensive teams in a row, which will be difficult. I mean, North Carolina, of course, struggled against Duke, but Duke may be the best defensive team in the country.
Wake's not a bad defensive team.
Yes, right. Wake's been pretty good this year in that regard as well. So I don't know that it could really have set up any better for North Carolina, not just in the first round, but in the first weekend as well. And the other thing is, as Sean mentioned, getting to play a Mountain West team, like more than anything, if North Carolina got in, I wanted them to play an SEC team or a Mountain West, because those are the comparisons. SEC, of course, I guess they got in 14 teams out of 16. Come on.
What are we even doing?
I know. And Mountain West ended up with what, 4? It's the same as the ACC.
And we're teetering on 5.
Right. So I think just being able to play a team out of one of those conferences is good. So we can actually have some confirmation and some resolution as to whether or not those programs are equivalent to what North Carolina has.
So I'll give a little bit of a preview of what San Diego State is about. And again, this is from the few times I've seen parts of games this year. I don't sleep a lot, guys, so I have seen some of their games when they have them on the CBS Sports Network.
Is it sleep or something else, Joey? Are you up
Yes.
late because you're down? Yeah, okay.
All of the above. But so just giving you guys a preview about San Diego State again. Mountain West team, they've gotten a lot of hoopla. They have been really good recently, but they absolutely just grind through transfers on a regular basis. Snapshot about them, who they look like. They did beat Houston this year, which is a good win, and they beat Boise twice. Their losses: Gonzaga, Oregon, Utah State twice, New Mexico, UNLV, Colorado State, and also lost to Boise, which knocked them out of their conference tournament earlier this past week. They're 21-9. They have a top 15 defensive rating on KenPom. The stat that I think Sean is probably getting ready to lose his mind about is the fact that in tempo, San Diego State is 245th in adjusted tempo. So they don't score a lot. They don't run a lot. They don't get a lot of chances. So, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. When they adjusted tempo is how many possessions they have, not necessarily they don't score a lot. But if you look at their game scores, they rarely get into the 90s. Don't get into the 80s very often. They're usually like 60s, 70s, and that's compare that with how North Carolina wants to play. They've been in the 80s mostly since they've been on this run here. Sherrell, I'll throw it to you. Just thinking about how this matches up for North Carolina, specifically with San Diego State. Are there any major things that you'd like to think are advantages for the home team, or do you think there are some things that might just be these the same fatal flaws that have gotten them all year?
Well, looking at San Diego State, honestly, guys, I can't say I know much about San Diego State other than looking at their KenPom sheet and some other stuff. But they are number one in the country in defensive block percentage. We know North Carolina has tiny guards relatively to most teams who like to drive into the paint. So that's something to look for. Other than that, for me, this comes down when UNC plays teams like this who want to make things a rock fight, who don't have a lot of skill from a scoring perspective based upon their profile over the course of 36 games. It's all about the defense, man. If North Carolina can just get stops, and I sound cyclical, I sound like I've said this for like 6 months, but I really believe it. If North Carolina plays good defense, they should win this game. I don't think that's controversial. I don't think that's taking the opponent lightly or anything. But if they force San Diego State into tough shots and are able to secure the defensive rebound, then they can go against a defense that isn't set. And North Carolina playing up tempo against a defense that isn't set is how, that's their path to victory most of the time, because we've seen how Sean said the offense can get down and get bogged down for 3, 4, 5 against Wake 10, 12 minutes without scoring a field goal. And that can't happen against a team like this. So how do you do that? You manufacture offense by playing good defense. And I think if North Carolina does that, then they should be able to walk out of there with a win.
Greg, I would ask you the same thing. A little different twist on it, though. What do you expect to see out of North Carolina going against a team like San Diego State? They do have a kid that's like 7'2" as a freshman that plays center.
I still think questionable if he plays. I know it was put out there in a tweet, but I think you got to do that if you're trying to make the tournament. He didn't play in the Big West, even though or the Mountain West. So we'll see on if Guath is playing or not.
Yeah. Well, so he's and he's kind of there. He's kind of leading them, and the reason they are as good in blocks per game, as Sherrell mentioned. But, Greg, I'd ask you first. I mean, Nick Boyd is kind of the straw that stirs the drink for them. He's averaging about 13.5 points a game. He has started every game for them this year. I just ask you, what do you think you could expect to see from North Carolina strategically when they line up or when they tip the ball off on Tuesday night?
Well, I already mentioned the rebounding part of things, and I think that's the key. Since Jalen Withers entered the starting lineup, North Carolina has done a better job kind of getting after the glass. And that's a weakness of San Diego State. I mean, if you look at their offensive rebound percentage, they're 201st nationally. And you look at their defensive offensive rebound percentage, they're 237. And defensively, they're stout. I mean, they're 6th in the country in effective field goal percentage. As you mentioned, they're 13th in adjusted defensive efficiency. So I think where Carolina can have some success is really getting after it on the boards. And that's probably an area where if Carolina plays well, they can actually win the rebounding edge. And if you do that, then you're limiting possessions for the other team. San Diego State is not a great offensive team. And North Carolina, as we know, can be. And it's really just a matter of you playing good enough defense, not letting San Diego State play kind of above who they are, controlling the glass, and then having some success offensively. And if Carolina can get out and get some easy buckets, as we've seen them be able to do, I think that I agree with Sherrell. I think that's the way to advance past Tuesday night.
Sean, I've saved this question for you. Talking about how good San Diego State is defensively and the fact that most of their success has been predicated on being a pretty stout defensive team and holding other teams to relatively low scores. Looking at whether or not Magoon Guath plays or not, again, big guy, space eater, very lengthy. He's really what you feel like you see from San Diego State on a regular basis, like one of these guys that's 7 foot tall, 240, 250 pounds, whatever. But North Carolina has found something in Ven-Allen Lubin. And I'm glad that he was announced to make the second-team all-tournament squad because he has been an absolute difference maker for them, being North Carolina, in the past 2 or 3 weeks, especially against Duke, who trotted, Cayman Malawach out there, who is also 7'2", and is going to be a top 10 pick in the NBA draft. And Ven-Allen Lubin had, a double-double in back-to-back games, 20 points and 10 rebounds against Wake and against Duke. Sean, do you think that maybe North Carolina has found the post answer that they looked for so long? And do you think it translates against a defensive team like San Diego State?
I think it has been great to see him playing well and putting up those numbers. I think him and Cadeau have also found a good chemistry, and he's getting the ball in good situations where he's not asked to do too much or maybe make a tough catch in traffic. So that is going to be an important matchup. Whether McGuath plays or doesn't, they still go 6'10", 6'10" at the 4 or 5. So they do have some size and some length. So it will be important to establish the post presence, and then same thing defensively, keeping them off the boards. When you watch San Diego State defensively, they're going to get up in you early in terms of pressure as soon as you throw the ball in. Half court, they're going to get in you at the half court line. And similar to Duke and the UVAs of past, they have a fairly good pack line D, so it makes it difficult. Even if you get by the first defender, there's still going to be it's not going to be a layup line. So to me, that goes one to Elliot Cadeau in terms of how is he playing? Is he focused? Is he staying out of foul trouble? I think we saw him pick up pretty much every game pick up 2 quick fouls even when he's not in foul trouble. But also, from UNC's focus, are they locked in? I do not want to see them fouling any 3-pointers. I do not want to see them stepping out of bounds, giving up possessions. If they're doing that, good night, game over. If they're locked in and they're not giving up silly possessions and turnovers, then they should have a good shot. But it is going to come down. One, I think how quickly are they moving the ball? So are they playing together? Because if you move the ball quickly, you penetrate, kick, 3 passes, you're going to get good looks against this team. But if you're going into those lulls, you're waiting until the shot clock is winding down. That's what they want, and that's not where UNC excels. So really, to me, Ven-Allen Lubin is important, and it's going to be good that they establish him early. But it's going to be how well are they playing together? How quickly are they thinking and reacting to each other?
I'm jumping in, Joey. I'm jumping in real quick. Based on what Sean said about the first halves, since we're here, since that got brought up, the coach staff has to have a handle on the game. They cannot let Carolina get down 8, 10, 14, 17.
24.
You got to pull that trigger on that use it or lose it timeout if that happens in the first half. It has happened many times this year, as we've seen, going back just Friday night where you're down 20 points in the first half. You've got to stop it before it becomes an avalanche. Stop it as just a little bit of snow. Don't let it become an avalanche. And I think that's, for a head coach, that's really, really, really important to understand how your team is playing, how they've come out, where their mindset is at, all that good stuff. Because, now they've been playing elimination games for about a month. So they should have a pretty good feel for what's happening and how to adjust.
Well, and even furthermore, Sherrell, I think everybody looks at the deficit that North Carolina faced against Duke on Friday night. But more importantly, that deficit went from 6 to 15 to 24 in a span of what was about 4 minutes of game action when you consider, when you take out timeouts and dead balls and whatnot. That absolutely could have been probably curtailed if you do nothing else but stop and gather the troops, because that lead was made by Duke's effort and energy, opposite of North Carolina's completely lack of effort energy. And so I'm with you, man.
To me, it's going to be like the Wake game. Like you can't let it get out too far. It's going to be tight. So you have to, if they go on a 4-0 run, 6-0 run, like that's it. Because it's going to each basket's going to be tougher, and it's going to come down, to the last 10 minutes.
And I think
how. Go ahead, Joey.
Well, I think, and somebody in the chat said this, and again, appreciate all the 1,300 of you who are with us tonight. I don't actually hate Roy's old adage of letting the team figure it out, but I think you can do that with a team that has proven themselves. This team is still very unsure of itself and is still playing with what confidence they have is a newfound confidence. And it was clear that they could not grasp it on their own in the first half against Duke on Friday night. Go ahead, Sherrell.
No, I was just going to say, I know it's because he was the last coach of Carolina, but we got to stop comparing Hubert Davis to Roy Williams, because there's not a comparison. So it's easy for Roy to do that because right, it's easy for Roy to do that because he's one of the 5 best coaches of all time. So we just all have to adjust our expectations about the coaching staff and everything. Again, that's not disrespect to say you're not one of the top 5 coaches of all time. That's not disrespect at all. But I think what really needs to happen, in football, it's like you need to have 3 or 4 plays that no matter who you're playing, where you're playing, what the condition is, whatever, they're going to work. Whether it's your 2-point play to get your first down, whatever, they've got to have 3 or 4 of those that if they get down 4, 6, or 8, they know they can go to, and they know that they can deliver, either some free throws or easy layup. And that sounds simple, but I don't know if they need to just maybe go back to the drawing board over the next couple of days, but you have to have 3 or 4 of those out of a timeout. And they're usually pretty good out of a timeout, to be honest, to have those ready to quell a run if it were to happen.
Well, and that's where they got back in the Duke game most of the time, because they were getting good offensive sets out of dead ball situations. And that's, part of that is Duke maybe wasn't prepared for it. Maybe they were a little stunned, but, for all of the criticism that Hubert Davis is due, he did throw some decent things in the last 3 games to get North Carolina baskets out of timeouts or out of dead ball situations. Next thing I want to ask you guys, and again, we're running up close to the end of the hour here, so thanks to everybody who's been a part of it. Greg, you haven't been on the show regularly, but we're glad you're here, so we're going to work you into something we've been doing lately. I've been asking Sean and Sherrell, scale of 1 to 10, does North Carolina get in? Well, we don't need to ask that anymore, but I'm going to ask you guys now, what's a ceiling check, right? We talked a second ago about how you felt about the pathway, so I'm going to ask you now, what is your ceiling check? Sean Moran, what is your ceiling check for this roster right
now? Ceiling check is Sweet 16.
All right, Sherrell, same question.
Yeah, that sounds right.
No, actually, ceiling. No, because Michigan State's ceiling check is Elite 8, but realistically, that's ceiling. So if they make it to the true first round, I'll be pleasant. I'll be happy, and not happy, but that's what I'm expecting.
All right, Sherrell, you same thing? Do you say you still want to say 16 or 8?
I'm honestly thinking 32. Honestly, again, not trying to sound negative, but
that's 2 wins.
Ole Miss is if they were able to beat San Diego State, Ole Miss is a battle-tested team, and that's going to be that's tough. Yeah. They could obviously do it, but I'll go ceiling Sweet 16. I don't think it's likely, but I think that's probably as good as they can do.
So, Greg, I'll let you take the last one here. And again, I don't know that there's a wrong answer, but the fact that we've got a little bit of variance, which has been our buzzword of the season. In fact, we've got a little variance between Sherrell and Sean. What do you expect from this team, Greg?
I think round of 32 is probably where they end up as a ceiling, because I do think they have a good shot against San Diego State if they're able to hit some shots and play effective defense. I think Ole Miss is about as good of a matchup as they can have against a good team in terms of size. We talked about that so much this year. I really like Iowa State. I know they haven't played as well recently as they were early in the year, but they're just fantastic defensively. And I think that's going to be a very tough game for North Carolina to win. So I think that Sunday game is probably best chance they have to enjoy a full week of NCAA tournament play.
If it gets there, Joey, just a note, Keyshawn Gilbert is announced as out for Iowa State. So that's a big deal.
Okay. I was getting ready to say, I know they've dealt with some injuries. I think Sean mentioned it earlier, but that is a big deal for them. So we'll see. And again, it may not even matter. Lipscomb may come out, barn burners. We've seen some 14-3 wins, guys. Let's not totally make it a foregone conclusion, shall we? Last thing, this is a bit of a wild card. I'm doing it. I'm not going to do who's your Final Four or give us your picks. I think that's terrible radio and terrible content. But put a little twist on it, because I think you can have some of Sean's pettiness against the Big Ten in here. We could have some Sherrell's perpetual optimism about where things might go. I have no idea what I'm going to get from Greg. All I know is he's been cool hand Luke over the past 3 days about North Carolina getting in. So I'm assuming he'll be steady here too. But the question for you guys is, who has the easiest path to the Final Four? I'm not going to put any caveats on it. I'm just asking you guys quick look. You've had the brackets for all of 65 minutes now, so I want you to tell me who you think has the easiest path to the Final Four. Greg, you're the new guy. I'm giving it to you first.
Unfortunately, I think Duke does. And part of that's because I think Duke's the best team in the country by a wide margin. I think
they're just that good.
Right. I think they are, but I don't think they're going to really be tested until they get to the Elite Eight. And even then, Bama, I guess, could give them a run. I'm not completely sold on Bama. So I think just because part of how good Duke is, but I think they have the easiest path to the Final Four.
It's one of the beautiful things about, being a 1 seed, right? You don't really have to play anybody until you get to that second weekend. And there's not they could potentially see Arizona, or they could potentially see Baylor. Again, Alabama, Wisconsin's faster than they usually are, but yeah, I'm with you. I think
maybe good Caleb shows up one last time.
Hey, he's not afraid of him, that's for sure. Sean, I'll give you the same question, man. Who do you think's got the easiest path to the Final Four?
Well, I would agree on that in terms of Duke. I love seeing Alabama in that bracket if they can get there and they're healthy in terms of a team that could beat Duke. But I think Duke is, just with their size and length, unfortunately, head and shoulders above pretty much everybody. But I would say Tennessee, just from a 2-seed perspective, I think I'm not a big fan of them, so I was looking forward to betting against them. But in terms of that side of the bracket, I think they could make it farther. So I would go them, and I know UConn has faltered as of late, but I still would love to see them potentially in the second round, just given some of the talent that they do have and from a coaching perspective.
Well, and anytime you've got guys that have been there the last 2 years, regardless of who's still around on that roster, they won't back down from the bright lights whenever that happens. All right, sure. Last one, man. Who do you like, or who do you feel like has probably the easiest little jaunt to the Final Four?
Honestly, I haven't. Y'all think I'm playing when I say I haven't really looked at the bracket. Like, I saw Carolina was in, and I kind of went and started doing other things. Like, I'm browsing it now.
Dancing and celebrating and praying, and yeah, all right.
I don't think Duke has the easiest bracket, because I think I really believe in Alabama. My personal philosophy with this every single year is kind of like, what unit, if it's playing at its best, is better than all the other units. And I think you can make a case for Florida, the offensive unit. You can make a case for Houston's. You can make a case for Houston's defensive unit. You can make a case for Duke's offensive and defensive unit. But I do think Alabama in the Elite Eight would be a tough game for Duke, just because there are so many athletes on that team. If pending Grant Nelson's health, there's so many athletes on that team, and then they have a player who, he's similar to RJ, but he's not. He's got more help than RJ has, who, if he gets going, can really win a game by himself. And they come in waves. And I think that's the thing with Duke is Carolina saw on Friday night, when 1A and 2 and 3 aren't there, they can still beat you with 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And Alabama has the kind of depth that I think could hang with them. Not saying they will, but that's why I think Duke doesn't have the easiest. I don't see a particularly easy path for any of the 1 seeds, honestly. You expect them to get to the Sweet 16, like minimum. So after that, I think all of them have games in which they could trip up before the Final Four.
I would say, sorry, Joey. I know it's mentioned UConn, but I would say Auburn, just with Michigan State as that two, potentially. I'd say that's probably the easiest path for 1 seed. And then to Sherrell's point, the only thing I think that could really beat Duke is very quick ball movement. And Auburn and Florida are probably the two teams in my mind that have that skill.
And I'll throw this in.
Alabama and Florida.
I was going to say I'll throw this in. I love the way Florida plays. I texted Greg earlier today. They're fun to watch, despite watching, seeing them firsthand when they did it to North Carolina this year. But they have really kind of found something recently, and watching them play as wide open as they did in the SEC tournament. But I'm going to throw a little nugget out there. I'm going to go ahead and push Clemson to the Elite Eight. They did it last year. I don't really think that there's anybody in their side of their bracket, at least until that 8 matchup, that should scare them from a style perspective. I think Houston and Clemson are very similar, and Clemson may actually be a better offensive team than Houston. I say that without looking at any statistics, but that would put Clemson and Tennessee having a nice little square up again in the Elite Eight. I think that would be a fun team to follow through here. Greg, you're going to tell me I'm full of crap. Why?
No, I think your buddy Clark Kellogg, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but he picked Clemson to beat Duke in the Final Four and get to the title game during the selection show. Yeah,
I don't think they're going to beat Duke twice in 1 year. But
kindred spirits, right?
Yeah, I get told that. I get told I look like him a lot.
I turned it off once Seth Davis was making predictions.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Didn't want that to cloud my judgment.
I was going to say there's garbage, and then there's Seth Davis. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I was harsh. But I don't put any stock into what he says, and he probably just does the same for me. So I actually like Clemson. I don't know if they're going to win it all, but anyway, guys, last segment of the day. Greg, I'm going to give you a chance to dig into your pocket, reach down in there a long way, find me a penny, shine that some gun up, and we're going to give it to our listeners as part of our 2 cents brought to you by Congruity. Tonight's going to be 3 cents, so you're actually getting a 50% bonus, which might be what Congruity can save your small or medium-sized business. That might be able to save you 50% on your company's output towards your back office expenses on a month. I don't know, but I tell you who could tell you that and who does know. That's our guy Matt at Congruity. Matt at congruityhr.com. He will get you your business assessment. He will help you look at all your books, look at where your expenses are going right now, how they might be able to tighten things up for you, allow you to focus more on the things that actually drive revenue for your company. And that's what you really got into this for, right? So whatever your small or medium-sized business is, go ahead, hit them up. Make sure you get a chance to get that small or medium-sized business assessment. It's free. Matt at congruityhr.com. Let him take care of it. He will tell you how they can save you money. And if they can't save you money, he'll tell you that too, and you haven't lost anything because it's free. We love Congruity sponsorship of this here show and other Inside Carolina content. We're appreciative of them. Want you guys to appreciate them too. All right, down to the wire here, guys. I appreciate y'all being here tonight. Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran, Greg Barnes. Sherrell, you go first. Give me 1 penny that you want to do for our 3 cents tonight, brought to you by Congruity.
As negative as some people have said I've sounded, North Carolina has a chance. You're in the tournament. That's all that matters. And for as hard or maybe as hard is the right word as we've been on the team and on Hubert Davis and his staff as well, I think you have to give them some credit, all things considered. All the caveats apply. But after Clemson, they could have quit. It could have spiraled out of control. Players could have already been in the portal right now, and they didn't let that happen. The team stayed together, and they did what they had to do. 8-2 over the last 10 was the absolute minimum that they had to do, and they did it. And I think even more so, if they lose that game to Duke by 25, I don't think we're having this conversation. I think the fact that they were able to come back and show themselves, worthy, for lack of a better phrase, is why they're in the tournament. See, if we're going to criticize them, we also have to give them credit. And they basically won their way into the tournament by playing another tournament over the last month.
Well, and I'm sure there'll be folks that hear Sherrell say that and say he's not criticizing the staff enough. But he makes a great point. I think it's also worth pointing out too that while there are no moral victories, nobody likes losing, especially to a Duke team that was down 2 players, and when you had a chance after coming all the way back to beat them, nobody likes that. But to Sherrell's point, that comeback did probably salvage North Carolina's season, at least for whatever value there was in the eye test portion of getting him into this tournament. Sean Moran, 1 penny, please, sir.
Joey, what's my favorite number to talk about?
8 threes a game.
8 threes a game. So 3-point shooting, San Diego State top 20 in terms of limiting opponents from their percentage perspective, around 30%. And over the last 5 games, San Diego State not known to be a 3-point shooting team, but they've hit 7, 7, 7, 9, 10. So it's going to come down to 3-point shooting. Can UNC shoot? We don't need them shooting at the 45, 50% that they have been in some of the ACC games, but they need to be hitting the 8+ threes. They need to be doing it at a 35 to 40% clip. And from that, Jalen Withers has been the straw that has stirred the drink, both good and bad. Is he going to be the one that we saw against Notre Dame, or is he going to be 2 for 10 like he was against Wake Forest and Duke? So he's going to have to come out because that 4 spot is a good matchup from both offensive and defensive. So to me, it's going to come down to the 3-point shooting and the ability on both sides to see who can have the better performance.
And I'm saying this for everybody that's listening to this show and is watching the show knows exactly where I'm going to go with this. But the candidate for being that guy against North Carolina, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you the name B.J. Davis. He has been the one this year, I think, that is probably the most likely to go out of his mind hitting from deep against North Carolina.
Who wins, RJ or BJ? That's also going to be a determining factor.
Look at you. You and your tricky questions. All right, Greg, thanks for being patient with us. Appreciate you being here. I know that this was I always enjoy having Greg on, full disclosure. But I know we have to bow to the man's schedule, and he makes us better when we're here, even when we have to rewrite the show right beforehand. But Greg, appreciate you being a part of the show tonight. You make your favorite podcast even better, more favoriter, if that's a word. Greg, give me 1 penny, man. Give me one thing that you feel like you want folks to be your last shot for the evening.
Joey, it's been a tough year. It didn't start the way people thought it was going to start, even though that Kansas game provided some optimism. But what we saw is that it ended up being a trend where Carolina got in the habit of falling behind and then had to battle back. And the season played out the same way. As you mentioned, you get back to that Clemson game and they didn't really have a chance, and then they battled back. So what I would say is that a lot of fans have been arguing. But I would tell the fans that if you're watching this show, if you're on the IC message boards arguing with other Carolina fans, that means you're a diehard fan. That means you passionately care about North Carolina athletics and, in this case, North Carolina basketball. So for a long time, I think North Carolina fans took the opportunity to enjoy the NCAA tournament, to enjoy March Madness for granted, because Dean was so good for so long and Roy was so good for so long. It's not something to take for granted. And I think living on the bubble has frayed some nerves, understandably. But you caught a break, and your team is in the NCAA tournament. And so take a breath, take a moment. As Sherrell has already said, there's time to discuss the future after the season. We're at the best time of the year if you're a sports fan. The NCAA tournament is just phenomenal. And North Carolina has a pathway to get into the first weekend. And I would just say, try to enjoy it. You push everything to the side with your thoughts on the coaching staff and the portal, all those things. There will be plenty of time to discuss those topics, but really enjoy what's about to transpire. North Carolina has never played in Dayton. It's going to be a blast. That's a cool place to cover a game, to watch a game. If you can make it up there, I recommend that you do it. But just really kind of reset and cheer the team on and have fun with it. Because, as we've talked about, this team has played a lot better ball over the last month or so. And it's not just because they played a weak schedule. They played some bad teams, but they've played better than expectations. And that's why they were able to come back against Duke. I know Cooper was out, but you got to give them credit for the way they rallied there in the second half. That was really impressive. And so I think they have the potential to make some noise. And I think there's a lot of reason to kind of set aside the disappointment and the frustration and just really enjoy some basketball. It's entertainment. I mean, we're here for the fun part of it. That's why fans cover or follow the game. So I just encourage everybody to try to enjoy what's coming up.
Man, I got real close to hopping down on the Hammond B3 and hitting some chords there to take up a little offering, Greg. That was a hell of a way to wrap this show, and I'd like to echo that. I think there's, we love the interaction from everybody on here that's been a part of the show and swaps with us on social media and stuff. It's fun to interact with you guys. North Carolina just got a reprieve, just literally 11th hour. Got out of the hangman's noose and now have free basketball. And so I would challenge everybody kind of to piggyback on what Greg said. Think about how we felt at the end of that Duke game, or how you may have felt in the past 48 hours thinking that North Carolina was out and the season was over. And now you've got a little bit of a reprieve. You always see in the movies when the guy almost dies and he comes back to life and he's got this new outlook on everything. It's this little smaller scale. And so I hope everybody can actually enjoy the next couple of days, see what happens. Maybe the Tar Heels can make a run. And more importantly, there will be all the time in the world to talk about the transfer portal and, Hubert Davis's coaching job and all this stuff. And next year, we have plenty of time for that, and we'll lead you through all that. But for now, just enjoy what's going to happen the next couple of days. It is one of the best times of the year. Go ahead and start figuring out what your excuse to get out of the office on Thursday and Friday is going to be. Maybe you feel like you're getting a flare-up of the gout. Maybe you just got a diagnosis of botulism, black lung, I don't know, some sort of old sailor's disease. What have you? You got time to figure it out. Go ahead and start working that in when you go to the office tomorrow. That way, Thursday and Friday, you can be out and just watch basketball all day. Because notice what probably the four of us are going to try to find a way to do. We appreciate y'all being here. Thanks to I think that we were over 1,300 at one point. You guys are awesome. Thanks for being here. We got more ball to talk about. We'll be back again next week to talk more ball. We'll see what happens then. For now, we know there's at least going to be one game this week, which we didn't expect. So here we go. Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran, Greg Barnes. I'm Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt, to Congruity for sponsoring. To Congruity for sponsoring. And John Sigley for producing. We will catch y'all very, very soon here on the next episode of the Coast to Coast on InsideCarolina.com. Take it easy.